Hi, I'm Dominique Elise. Welcome to the Next Come Up Show. Today we have a special guest. He's an author and also a stage director. His name is Stephen Patten. He goes also by the name of SVP. So welcome to the show.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me, Dominique.
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. Great.
Perfect. So you're an author.
Yes.
You have several books out.
I have a few.
How did it all start?
Well, let's see. I think what a lot of people go through in American culture, especially people of color, is you end up admiring something or falling in love with something that doesn't necessarily love you back. For some people, it could be a number of things, but for me, it was horror movies. So, you know, as a kid, it was a good distraction because as a kid, I was definitely something of a, you know, comic book nerd, bookish, and all of that. But, you know, as I started to get older, get a little more observant, then I started to notice that, you know, the same things everybody else notices, is like the black characters in horror movies dying before the credits are over, and, you know, it's just like the lack of character development and that sort of thing. So, you know, so that basically compelled me to write my own stuff. And that's basically what I did.
Can you tell me, how does someone become a novelist?
Well, there's a couple of steps to it, but the main things are studying. You know, I went to school.
Oh, really? Which school?
Long Island University.
Oh, great.
You study, you read a lot, you get some sort of tutelage as to how you put a book together and that sort of thing. Just formal studying, I'm just saying. And then after that, you really just have to just kind of sit down and write your stuff. You know, a lot of people come to me. It's like as a matter of fact, I was at a party the other night, and someone said, "Hey, you know, if I give you the notes, can you write?" And it's like, no, dude, that's not how it works. And you don't even know how much money you would have to pay me for me to now stop everything I'm doing and write your book. You know, it's like that's you know, it's better to just sit down. The process anyway is sit down, write your first draft, read it over, put it together, and a lot of people don't talk about this. Get yourself some beta readers.
Oh, okay.
You know, and not just like your family and folks that are just going to be like, "Oh, this is wonderful, baby." No. You got to get people you got to have friends that will tell you when you're effing up, so to speak. So, you know, and when you put a beta reading team together, you know, you've got to have that friend that'll call you out on something that doesn't make, you know, something that you said on page 8 that maybe contradicts page 80. Okay. You know, you gotta have your grammar Nazi beta reader, you know, who'll keep you in the right tenses and you know, check your spelling and all that stuff. Yeah, you know, once you do that, you get a team of those guys together, and then once they give you notes, then you have to actually hire a professional editor, which isn't cheap, but it definitely saves you from looking foolish when you finally put the book out.
Wow, that's a lot. It's a long process. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
it's very long. But does writing energize you, or it makes you exhausted at times?
It's a little of both. I mean, it's an artistic process, you know, so I will be in a different frame of mind whenever I'm sitting down and working on it. I usually work at night. Okay. I usually work in the middle of the night. That's when you're writing horror. It's kind of comes hand in hand. For me, anyway. I don't know. Other people may have a different process. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure everybody has a different process.
It makes you have more ideas at night?
Well, I'm sort of a nocturnal person anyway. Okay. I've had trouble sleeping throughout the years and that kind of thing. So a lot of what has happened is, you know, my way of making sleeping lemons into lemonade, if that makes sense.
Do you have a specific place you go write your stuff, or just?
Yeah, usually the bedroom.
The bedroom?
Usually my bedroom. Usually my bedroom. Or, well, I've moved residences a few times since I've been doing this. So if I've been in a situation where I had an office, then you know, then I'd use the office. But more than likely, I just, you know, I have a nice one of those sort of like big office chair things that I keep, and I just kind of sit in there and laptop, and I just hammer away.
No
and
music, just
sometimes music. Sometimes music, sometimes a horror movie that I've seen 100 times playing on the TV in the background just to kind of keep me in the mood. It varies. I'm very moody that way, so it's like at any given point, I would require different stuff.
Perfect. So you came out with different books today, and then can you give us details about them, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the first book I ever wrote, Brookwater's Curse, Volume 1. It starts off. It is about an 1860s Georgia plantation slave who becomes a vampire. Oh, wow. And it's basically his adventures from the cotton field all the way to almost modern time.
That's so interesting.
Thanks. I was hoping people would think that. So there's a lot of things going on with his vampire community. He eventually becomes vampire law enforcement.
Oh, wow.
So that means if you're a vampire and you do something that, let's say, jeopardizes the great secret, Christian will probably come see you.
Okay.
And, you know, either that works out one way or works out the other.
Oh.
The second book actually deals with a vampire civil war.
Oh, okay.
Because what happens is the werewolf community is also has to also be controlled, but there are and yes, I am kind of, when I wrote this, I was kind of making an analogy between people who are inclusive and well, let's say inclusive of other races and other people, as opposed to those who aren't.
Okay.
So it's very similar to that. So it's sort of a save the werewolf story, because the werewolves aren't, you know, have been painted as villainous when they aren't really.
Okay.
So that was kind of where that comes from.
Oh,
and the third book is basically I guess you could call the conservative vampires making a sort of a try at revenge.
Okay.
And at this time, Christian has risen into vampire government, and he's working with a samurai vampire who nurtured him back in the first book. So it's a fairly complicated story, but it's entertaining.
Yeah, it's very entertaining. It's very different than other books that I used to read. So I'm very happy that you came with them and explained to them each of them. It's very cool. But which one was the most challenging one for you to write?
Oh, well, they've all been challenging because, you know, life gets in the way. I mean, you know, as we'll talk about the other part of my life, it's like that part of my life tends to be fairly unpredictable, the 9 to 5, if you want to call it, which isn't really a 9 to 5 because it could happen at any given time.
Yeah.
That tends to be pretty unpredictable, and then my social life has been unpredictable. So that's the balance of social life, writing, and the TV work. You know, it's like those three things are constantly pulling me one way or the other. So because when I actually finally have a clear head and sit down and write, for me it's the greatest thing.
Well, your characters, are they based in real life people, or just where do you get your inspiration from?
My characters are a mix of me. There's always little elements of me in there. They're people I know, and sometimes I mix and match characteristics. Because I think writers, you know, we tend to observe a lot, and then we incorporate little things we see from, you know, from everyday life. You know, there could be somebody who's being really loud and obnoxious on the subway, and then what'll happen is I'll end up killing a version of that person in one of the books. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I did that in Killer Genius, which I forgot to talk about. But
oh yeah, we forgot about.
Oh yeah, Killer Genius. So Killer Genius is about a hyper-intelligent black woman who decides to become a socially conscious serial killer. Wow. And what that generally translates into is, and I don't use the actual names in the books, but just so people understand, my killer could easily kill Rush Limbaugh one day, and then kill a rapper with, let's say, misogynist lyrics the next. The idea being neither one of them is great for society. Neither one of them is helping to bring us forward.
Oh, wow.
At least that's what she's thinking.
Your books are so awesome. Like, I really want to read them. Now I'm focused to read them. Did it happen to you before where you said, oh, I don't want to complete that book anymore. I just want to do something else?
Well, you know, the other thing is, so after I put these books out, I ended up joining the Horror Writers Association, the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association. And their guidance was, well, these books are all very interesting and very nice and all, but this is where I sort of put the carriage before the horse, is that I'm not really a household name yet.
Okay.
So I've done all this work, but very few people know who I am per se. And it's a lot of running around to conventions and shaking hands and kissing babies and all that stuff. So, you know, in that regard, I didn't quite do the due diligence. So the guidance from the Horror Writers Association has been to get my short story game up. So what's been happening along with all of this is that I've submitted and gotten a few short stories into horror anthologies. And basically it's just a bunch of stories, and I'm slipped in there with usually with a bunch of other great horror writers. And that's good, because then fans of these other writers then stumble upon my story, they figure out who I am, they hit me up on Twitter, and you know, and it just kind of, you know, and the brand grows from there.
Does it, social media helps you a lot?
I'd be dead in the water without social media.
Oh, wow.
100%.
Wow. Where can people find your books?
The website's the easiest, www.laughingblackvampire.com. But I'm on Amazon, I'm on various social platforms, so.
Talking about Amazon, because people are saying, is it a difficult transition when you write your book and then you have to do a second deal because you have to sell it to Amazon? How does the business aspect of it?
Well, the way I do it is I make sure I own my ISBN numbers. Okay. Those are sort of like the serial number for the book. Okay. Because other people do it differently and whatever, but I like to, I mean, I've had other publishers.
Okay.
And to be honest, they didn't always do their diligence, you know, so I end up getting the rights back, and then when I get the rights back, then I end up republishing. That's actually what's going on with Killer Genius right now. Oh, okay. But I mean, it's fine, because I'm basically just going to re-release Killer Genius on my label, and then release the sequel, which I think we saw the cover of the sequel pretty soon. So it's like within the next couple of weeks, Killer Genius 2 is going to be out. Okay. Killer Genius 2, just to give you an idea, is it's the same serial killer. Okay. And now she's tangling with a couple of Russian serial killers.
Oh, that's amazing.
So they kind of do a serial killer versus serial killer thing, and you know, obviously other people get caught in the crossfire, and
so
it
it's just like
gets
it's based on what's going on right now.
To a degree, to a degree. There's shades of it. There's shades of it. You know, I don't put a certain awful president in my stories by any means, but you know, what I tend to do is I mention the overall bad effects that, you know, our community may suffer at the hands of, you know, conservatism.
Okay, perfect. Do you try to be more original, or do you listen to other people's ideas and no, or you want whatever you have in mind is what you have in mind?
Actually, I spend a great deal of time watching other vampire movies, other serial killer genre films, and things of that nature. So I'm not doing what they're doing. Okay. So and sometimes there's like there's certain things that can't be helped. You know, like how to kill a vampire and all that other stuff. There's going to be some kind of cross and mix up and everything else like that. And it's so funny, because a lot of people, especially when it comes to the vampire stuff, they will ask me, hey, wait a minute, you wrote this, and oh, I saw this movie, and you don't understand. It's like there's creative license when you sit down and write any kind of monster story. Mm-hmm. The trick is, you know, you just have to not, the trick is to not break your own rules.
Okay.
Or if you're going to break your rules that you set in the beginning of your story, then you need a damn good reason. That's all.
Oh, Okay, perfect. Why did you choose specifically horror though?
Well, it's a few things. Like I said, when I was a kid watching the movies, you know, it's just, and this is Hollywood in general. This isn't just horror, but you know, just the fact that people of color and lack of character development, like real character development and things like that, you know, like all of that, I started to notice as I got older, and so there were a couple of things, of course, that really threw me over the edge. One of them was the movie Blackula. Now, Blackula, for those that haven't watched it, is about an African prince who makes the mistake of approaching Count Dracula to sort of encourage his help with abolishing the slave trade. Mm-hmm. Goes left. He turns him into a vampire. He ends up in 1970s California, and he goes, you know, biting people in the neck and everything else like that. That stuck with me because the actor that played him, William Marshall, played that role with such dignity and such gravitas that even as a little kid, I was like, well, that's different. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that, and then there's this other scene, speaking of Blackula, there in the sequel, Scream, Blackula, Scream, where there he is, big as day, walking down the street, actually not attacking anyone. He's propositioned by a prostitute. He waves her off. He then gets approached and threatened by her two pimps. Mm-hmm. And then he said something to the effect, I'm going to mess this up, but he said something to the effect of, you're not doing anything other than emulating your slave masters. Mm-hmm. And you've enslaved your sister. They're still not listening. They fight. He bites them, blah, blah, blah. But that speech, that was the first time I heard something socially conscious in a horror movie. Yeah. And that, probably more than anything else that happened, that sent me back towards the vampires more so than anything else. Even though I'm also a big fan of the Hammer films and Christopher Lee and all that stuff. The one other thing that happened to me as a kid, so The Shining. Okay. Old Stephen King novel from like the 80s. Mm-hmm. Now, I read it like somewhere between 10 and 12. And I wasn't old enough to go see the movie, but my birthday came up. So my mother and my aunt were like, well, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I want to go see The Shining. So there's a big difference between the movie and the book. Okay. And the big difference is in the book, the black man saves the day. Oh. In the movie, Scatman Crothers takes an axe in the chest from Jack Nicholson. Mm-hmm. I don't think I have to worry about that being a spoiler because it's a very old film, and if you haven't seen it by now, I don't know what to tell you. So my mother and my aunt sat there, watched this movie. I'm expecting, because I'm a little kid, I don't know any better. I don't know that the casting of Scatman Crothers in this, what in the book is like this macho part. You know, I don't realize that I'm setting myself up for disappointment until I'm like there in the theater and I see this horrible thing. And my mother and my aunt were not very happy about that part of it, and that stuck with me because, you know, they kind of gave me a hard time after the fact. So those three things, I think, are what led me to finally say, you know what, I'm going to write horror.
Do you want to turn one of your books into a screenplay?
I would, and there's been talks about that back and forth. There were times I've been optioned and contracts ran out and that kind of thing. It's a very rough and tumble sort of thing. I hope to someday bridge that gap, make that connection, that kind of thing. I am working on screenplay adaptations for everything. But you know, that also becomes a thing where it's just so many hours in the day, because in addition to the other projects that I work on outside of horror and everything else, you know, sometimes you just got to find the time somewhere. So I have the screen adaptations. They're being worked on, but you know, the whole time I've been approached by other people who said they were going to do X, Y, and Z, and then of course they didn't. There's been a lot of people making promises and then not showing up.
That's the nature of entertainment.
Yes, and that's why I kind of take it with a grain of salt and keep pushing and doing what I do.
Yeah. So let's just move on to your quote unquote 9 to 5.
Okay.
So which one do you like the most? The stage director or writing your book?
They both satisfy different things in me. Obviously, the writing is my creative outlet. When I'm a stage director, I get to handle logistics. I get to solve problems. I get to be like the quick thinking, hey, go over here, hey, let's try this. I get to be that guy. I don't get to be creative per se, but I definitely get to prove to myself that I can think fast and handle difficult situations.
What is a typical day as a stage director?
It kind of depends on the show you're working on. I mean, the two things that I'm working on right now, which is The Break with Michelle Wolf, which is fairly laid back. You know, it's like, because it's basically just Michelle Wolf telling jokes.
Yeah.
The View can be a little intense, and I'm there Fridays, you know, just kind of filling in, because one of their I want to say the gentleman that's basically held the position of lead stage manager for The View, you know, he has family obligations.
Okay.
So he's using those Fridays to take care of that. So I get to slip in and do my thing a little bit. But it can be a little intense at times, you know, depending on people's moods, because of course sometimes they end up arguing during the show, and then
it's all females, so of course they're gonna be.
Well, it's females, and it's also females who disagree politically.
Yes.
So that's a whole other dynamic. So that definitely keeps you on your toes that way.
So you feel the tension when they like.
Sure, absolutely. Sure,
wow. You're
in the room. You know, there's no way not to feel the tension. You know, it's like when you're a little kid and you know folks are fighting in the house. It's like, gee, you know. But I mean, they're all very, very nice. You know, as far as I go, you know, they're all very cool. But and it's funny because I think one of the pictures you showed in the intro was actually taken while Whoopi Goldberg was actually giving me a hard time.
Oh, really?
Well, what happened was, not really, she was just messing with me. But the thing was, first of all, nobody told her that regular guy was off that day.
Oh, okay.
So when she comes out, that's like her first time seeing me, and then she's like, "Wait a minute, why is he standing there?" So it was just kind of one of those things. But I mean, you know, it was all in fun. It wasn't like she wasn't like angry or anything, you know. But you know, it was just one of those moments. But you know, it's like I said, depending on the show and the mood and who's in charge, and like a lot of that has an effect on how the show feels and what your job actually is. Because stage managing it's logistics, but it's also a lot of like personality juggling.
Okay.
Because you've got the host of the show, you've got like some camera guy who may be going through his little midlife crisis thing, and you got to like maybe take him out for a drink and talk him down from whatever ledge he's on. You know, there's a lot to it. But it's not as political as being the actual director or being the producer or anything else like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, once we're done shooting, there's a lot of the show that I could just strip off and, you know, and then after that, I can go home and work on the books.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
So it works out that way.
It could inspire you also when you're on set. You see those
absolutely.
tension and then
absolutely. And there is actually a rapper that dies in Killer Genius in a, you know, and that was something that was actually inspired from me filling in at 106 in Park years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I mean, that's the nature of the beast. It's like I've worked on a lot of different stuff. And because stage managers move around so much, and because we live this sort of like freestyle, freelance life, you know, like anytime tomorrow, I like tomorrow, somebody could get sick and I'm over at the Tonight Show.
Okay.
You know, the show that was mine most recently was Harry Connick Jr. show. And that's the other thing. That's the bad side of it. Losing the job for no other simple reason except for the fact that, you know, nobody watched.
Exactly.
It could be the greatest show ever, but if nobody watches it, it's going to get canceled. And that's just the reality of it.
Any advice you want to give out to people who wants to become like a great novelist like you? Like,
well, great novelist. Ooh, thank you. Perseverance.
okay.
If you really want this, you have to push, and you have to, and like a lot, like you see our hip hop brothers out there with the street teams. I'm saying get a street team because it's not like a street team thing,
Yeah.
but you need a team. You need a support system around you if you're going to be a successful novelist. You know, and I know that's not what people are expecting me to say, I don't think, but definitely, you know, your family and friends, like, they have to be on board. And if this is your dream, and they're not supporting it, maybe you need new friends.
Yeah.
That's kind of the things that have popped up over the years for me.
Well, I wish this interview could be 1 hour because I have so much other questions to ask you. But thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, thank you.
I learned so much from you. I'll make sure to read some of your books because it looks very crazy and I want to read it. I want to be inspired too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I am Dominique Elise. This was a great episode of the Next Come Up Show. Until next time.